Welcome to today's recap. We are reviewing Teen Wolf movie. The film takes place 15 years after the television series. Scott's pack has all scattered and fled Beacon Hills. The film opens with Liam, our favorite beater, and Hikari, a kitsune working at a Japanese restaurant that also serves as a prison for the wicked trickster spirit, the Noitun. A strange man with a hood enters into the diner one day, hinting that he is aware that everyone present is a supernatural person. Harris, the alleged deceased chemistry instructor from Beacon Hills, is shown to be the hooded figure. He leads an attack and frees the Nogitsune in exchange for vengeance on Scott and his comrade. Scott and Deaton run an animal shelter and clinic in Los Angeles, and they occasionally volunteer in the neighborhood. In the first scene, we witness Scott in action as he rescues a little girl and her pet dog from a burning building. Scott looks wistfully and sorrowful as the girl and her family leave after having the pet inspected. Deaton believes Scott may be harboring some unresolved desire or remorse. As they prepare to depart, Scott notices the deceased Allison hammering on the door and pleading for aid, much like she did when they first met. As she walks away, the animals at the shelter begin to bark, and Scott runs into Allison's father, Chris Argent. Chris tells Deaton and Scott that he has been seeing and hearing Allison as if she is real for the previous 2 weeks. They believe Allison is trapped between life and death and recommend executing a ceremony to bring her spirit to rest. We cut to Lydia, who begins hallucinating and ends up painting something mysterious while in trance. She and Scott arrive in Beacon Hills and travel to Oak Creek, where Allison was murdered by the Nogitsune's Oni and has flashbacks. They reunite in Scott's old house, along with Chris and Jackson, who accompanied Lydia. She displays her cryptic drawings and informs them that she requires assistance because she no longer fully utilizes her banshee powers. When they ask her why, Jackson implies it has something to do with style. Chris and Scott are both annoyed to see him, but he deciphers her drawings and determines that the Nematon, the sacred tree, is where the rite must be performed. At Beacon Hills, Derek's kid, Ellie, continues the pack's naughty tendencies by stealing Styles' vehicle. Mason, who is now a cop, Sheriff Stilinski, and their consultant Derek are at an arsonist's crime scene. Derek begs the sheriff to contact Styles, but he refuses since his son is working with the FBI. Mason is continuously receiving calls about Eli stealing the vehicle, so Derek rushes to stop him. Derek is upset with Ellie at home. They dispute and end up discussing Ellie's inability to wolf out. Ellie walks away, explaining that he cannot change since he is not a werewolf in the first place. Derek tries to make amends by asking him about the lacrosse game that night, but Eli has sneaked off. Malia runs the Hale Auto business, which Parrish returns Styles' vehicle to. She jumps on him to greet him, and they end up having sex. Once they're through, Parrish looks at her regretfully, and they resume an unfinished chat about relationships, despite the fact that she swears she doesn't want one. A telegram from Lydia interrupts them, and Malia rushes to see her. As Chris prepares for the ceremony, Deaton arrives in Beacon Hills with a mysterious Japanese engraved bullet of Chris's. He continues to question him riddles, and when Chris responds, the Nogitsune who had possessed him appears. Deaton pours mountain ash on him, releasing Chris from the trickster, who flees. Malia runs into Scott and Lydia and has an uneasy reunion as they seek for her assistance in obtaining the Nematon. Lydia is delighted to see her, but Scott and Malia appear to be seeing each other for the first time since their breakup. They come upon Eli, who informs them that he sleepwalks and knows where the Nematon is located. Malia sends him packing after they discover it, and they begin the procedure. Nothing occurs after a little storm. Allison materializes on the Nematon, unconscious as they turn to go. They are taken aback and rush her to the hospital. Allison wakes up and skips out of the hospital, leaving Scott, Lydia, Malia, and Melissa perplexed. She is bewildered, and all she recalls is being a werewolf hunter. Scott tracks her down and attempts to stop her from fleeing, but all she wants is to murder Derek. She sees her father and, as Chris summons her, flees. Meanwhile, practically all of the cops have been dispatched to another arsonist crime site. The station's only officer encounters the Nogitsune, who claims to be a kitsune. He takes all 9 of his tails and summons 9 Onis. The pack is concerned about Derek and goes to warn him in the hospital. Allison, meanwhile, returns home to gather weapons. The Nogitsune arrives in the shape of her deceased mother and begs her to kill Scott as well because he is a killer. He intends to employ the Oni to eliminate Scott's supporters off the board, while she focuses on the winning move, which is to kill Scott. Lydia and Jackson visit the station and discover the corpse of a Kitsune officer. Derek, who had come to cheer, assists Eli after he twists his ankle during the game in the high school locker room. He persuades him to attempt to heal, but Allison assaults them at the same time. Derek fights her off, but is taken aback by her appearance. She shoots an arrow into the side of his throat as he attempts to flee. Liam, Hikari, Malia, and Scott arrive just in time, and she flees. The officers determine that the offender is not an arsonist, but someone who wants something from the several flames at the next arsonist crime site. They only assault them and stabbing Mason, who then vanishes. They drive Derek home where Peter awaits them. He lights a blowtorch and declares that the only way to rescue Derek is to burn the wound, which will hasten his recuperation. Scott pursues Eli, and Melissa instructs him to save Allison as well. Allison follows Eli as he flees into the shop and hides. Scott arrives just in time to save Eli and activates Eli's metamorphosis, which heals his ankle. Scott encourages him to go to his father while attempting to reason with Allison. As Eli flees, he comes across Shy Right. As Liam and Hikari arrive at the station to pick up the sheriff, they are met by Lydia and Jackson. Peter stops Chris at Hales because he believes Chris will help Allison kill Ely. But Chris informs him that he knows his daughter is dead, and they end up working together to find and murder Allison. Melissa joins them as they search for Allison and Scott at Hal Auto. Meanwhile, Hikari and Liam inform Lydia that the hooded man, Harris, is responsible for the fires. Derek and Eli had a brief reunion at Hal's as just a few only assault. Deaton, Derek, Sheriff, and Ellie have all been stabbed. Only the sun prevents them from capturing Malaya as they vanish in the light. The others pursue Liam and Hikari, who are on the hunt for Scott. They are also stabbed and disappear as they express their love for each other. Lydia and Jackson are at the station attempting to figure out Harris's strategy when Malia and Parrish inform them about the Oni. They travel to one of the burn sites as Parrish and Malia gather silver weapons capable of killing Oni. Lydia and Jackson see that when the rowan trees are burned, they change into mountain ash, and that the perpetrator must be knowledgeable in chemistry because they employed a particular accelerant. Scott lets Allison fatally knife him in the wilderness and asks if they can finally talk now that he is a dead man walking. He assists her in remembering her new credo for protecting the vulnerable, and she knocks him out. She brings him to a storage room but begins to have reservations. To keep her focused, the Nogitsune use Peter and the knowledge that he murdered her Aunt Kate. Scott awakens, concerned about Hikari, who was also shot by Allison. She informs him that because Hikari is a kitsune, Wolfsbane will not harm her, but the Oni will. He informs her that the Oni killed her, but she doesn't believe him. He strikes a deal with her that if she believes him, she must save him. we are ultimately led to the Nogitsune's illusion, where Eli, Derek, and the others who were stabbed are imprisoned. Hikari assures the inmates that they will not perish, since their suffering strengthens the Nogitsune. Liam notices cheering and understands that the illusion is just next to the lacrosse field. Peter, Chris, and Melissa also find themselves in the stadium, wondering what the Nogitsune is up to. Lydia phones Parrish and informs him about the fires, comparing them to the one that destroyed Derek's family and was started by Kate, Argent, and Harry. Furthermore, the only person who knows how to apply the formula is supposed to be dead, implying that Lydia assumes Harris is responsible for the fires. Meanwhile, Harris has surrounded the stadium with mountain ash. Scott offers Allison a snapshot of them at the ice rink at the storeroom. He then tells her about the school dance at which he kissed her and declared his love for her. She recalls the events, but does not recall Scott. He also informs her about their split, and she recalls what he last said to her. She breaks down and decides to assist him. She produces a flame to burn the wound, recalling Scott holding it while he was possessed by the Dara. Scott recovers and discovers they have arrived at the stadium. The Nogitsune in the illusion is enraged that Scott has healed and decides to modify the game. He drops Ely in the middle of a lacrosse game. Scott follows Allison outdoors as she searches for her father, warning her to be cautious. She is astounded that he still loves and cares about her. Scott spots Eli and they try to leave the stadium, but the mountain ash barrier prevents them. They approach Coach and beg him to ask the fans to flee since they are in danger. Coach, on the other hand, advises them that the only way to solve the situation is to win the game. Scott and Ely eventually agree to play the game. Lydia and Jackson find Harris on the outskirts, and Harris shoots Jackson. Lydia tries to stop him, and he tells her about his vengeance for offering him as a sacrifice to the Darak. He leads Lydia to the field's entrance and demonstrates that it is a doorway to the illusion. Derek and Sheriff are shown discussing Ellie's inability to change since he was traumatized when Derek shifted to save him from a coyote as a child. Outside, Harris instructs Lydia to frighten Jackson in order to convey her sorrow for the Nogitsune. She tells him about Styles and how she left him due of a premonition. He is killed in an automobile accident. She claims she fled because the vehicle accident will never happen if she is not with him. The dream is also the reason she stopped using her wailing abilities. Allison is watching the sport and finds Scott amusing when he makes mistakes. Eli scores and they win the game. Peter assaults Allison at that point, but Chris poisons him with wolfsbane because he always knew she was his daughter. When Chris and Allison cuddle, Melissa cures Peter. Nevertheless, the illusion kidnaps Allison, Eli, and Scott. Malia and Parrish arrive to the stadium, and she instructs him to use his hellhound fire to breach the barrier. When Ellie rushes to liberate Derek, Allison and Scott fight the Oni to buy Parrish time to enter the illusion with Silver. Nevertheless, they are overwhelmed and nearly beaten, prompting Lydia to lament. Allison's memories are brought back by the cry, which pulls the Oni out of the illusion. The Nogitsune, on the other hand, holds Ellie by the throat, while the Oni threaten Melissa, Peter, and Chris. Scott gives up and orders Allison to murder him. She is upset, but she follows his instructions and shoots him in the heart. The Oni leave Peter, Melissa, and Chris alone as he collapses into his arms, while the Nogitsune taunts Scott. Nevertheless, he is healed after being sheltered by Hikari's foxfire. Allison shoots Nogitsune in the head as Parrish breaks through the barrier, and Melissa, Chris, Mason, and Malia, who begin murdering the Oni with Silver. Meanwhile, in the midst of the chaos, Jackson and Lydia disarm Harris. Derek and Ely release the other prisoners, but the Nogitsune reminds them that Scott was once bitten and turned into a werewolf. In another illusion, he divides Scott, Ellie, and Derek, but they free themselves by signaling each other. Eli is ejected and Parrish arrives to burn the Nogitsune. Derek tells Scott to watch after Eli as a pack member and then dismisses him. He holds the Nogitsune down as Parrish's fire burns them both. Derek evolves into a genuine alpha before passing away. Everyone returns to reality, and Scott and Allison kiss. Scott then hugs Eli while Allison reunites with Lydia and Jackson. Scott recalls Derek during the burial as Sharif hands over Styles' vehicle to Eli. He informs him that Derek was the one who took it to Hale Auto and repaired it. Allison and Scott wind up working together to operate an animal sanctuary at the end of it all. While she feels a pang of guilt for having wasted so much time, Scott tells her that he no longer feels that way since he has a bright future ahead of him with her. They both grin and kiss each other. At the same moment, Harris's transfer to prison is halted, and he is forcibly taken from the truck by Aiken Houseguard. Despite his pleas that he poses no threat and should not be detained in the supernatural mental facility, the guards carry him away. Please share your thought in the comment section. Also, click the like button and subscribe for more interesting recaps.